there, Sparkle Squad. This is Monica. So today we're going to talk a little bit about using these that I call wire guards. They're sometimes referred to as wire guardians. We are going to be using the 0.15, which is the middle of the road, and it's the 7-strand wire, which is the basic amount of strands, because I don't feel like I need to worry about any kind of upgrade in my piece since I'm just making this bracelet here for myself. I'm going to feed on a size 2 crimp tube first. We are going to add on a wire guard, which is another way to finish your piece so that you don't have your wire exposed. Put that through one of the holes of your wire guard. You're going to feed the wire through, then come through the other side of that loop and start to push that through the hole. It's like a little horseshoe shape. Now I'm going to kind of get it pushed through a little bit so that I have a little bit of slack there, and then start to push it through my crimp tube. Now when I put my jewelry together, I do not let my wires cross when they are within the crimp tube. So a trick that I use, once I've got it through the crimp tube right here, I hold both ends with my thumbnail so that my wires are side by side, and then I just kind of scooch up the loop as far as I need it. Now you really only need about 1/4 of an inch of a loop, so I am going to kind of scooch myself up here so that I don't have as much waste on my wire. I have actually just shortened how my loop is going to be as far as the tail that I'm going to have going through the beads, because I don't need a huge amount of waste until you get comfortable with that. What I mean is, see how small my tail is over here, my wire. So grab hold of that so that it doesn't cross within your crimp tube. Give it a push. You might even want to pinch just lightly so that you can give that nudge up there. Get your wire cover all the way up to the edge, and then continue to nudge that little tube all the way up until it meets your wire guard. And you might even want to use your bent nose pliers to give the two sides of the wire guard a little squeeze. You're not flattening anything, you're just squeezing that so that it meets your crimp tube a little bit better. You want that crimp tube to be right up against the ending of the wire guard so that there's no space, there's no wire that's just kind of loosey-goosey over here on the top, because if you do that, then once you go to crimp your crimp tube, there's going to be an excess loop here and it's not going to look nice. It'll be too loose. So now I'm going to take my crimping tool. I'm going to go right here in the second channel of my crimping wire to where I have this in the second channel. Just give it a nice good squeeze. That makes a U shape. So now this side of the wire is held and this side of the wire is held on either side, and this center is now flattened so that it separates both sides of the wires. Then I want to reposition my pliers on top of what I just crimped, and we're going to crimp it a second time by coming right here in the first channel on either side of that U shape. This is going to make an oval crimp. Give it a squeeze. And when I do that, you can see now it has actually closed both sides of that U. You can give it another squeeze if you want to with your bent nose pliers. Here's the wire guard. It's holding our wire. Then we've got the crimp, which is right up against the wire guard. And now we have this little tail, and I always just cover up the tail with the beads. It lends itself to a little bit more strength at the end of your piece. Now at this point right here, if you like to use crimp covers, which are these lovely little kind of a Pac-Man look to it, feel free to do so, which I'm going to go ahead and do, because it makes it look like, once you've got this closed, a little shiny silver bead on the end of the piece, which is a little bit more professional looking. That is what your crimp cover looks like. But what I do is I look for the rounded part of the crimp that I just did to be on the bottom, so that the front of my sandwich, that's what I call this thing, since it's kind of sandwiched together now, so that the front of it is on the top and I can balance it a little easier. Now it is a little bit more cumbersome when you start using these wire guards to put your crimp cover on, but it does ultimately make it look like a more finished piece. So you're just going to kind of balance this as well as you can. I like to kind of put it on the meat of my finger here, and then come up on either side and close it up, trying not to get your wire guard in there. I'm not flattening that crimp because see, now it just looks like it is a round bead. Now, I don't like using these wire guards because I feel like it kind of gives me a little bit too much tension on the end of my piece, but many people love using the wire guards. This wire guard makes a lot larger loop than what I prefer on my finished jewelry. Whenever I do these, I'm just adding the clasp right onto the wire directly. You can see how little that loop is. I still have plenty of dangle freedom, you know, there's no kind of tension in there. It doesn't look bad. But there are some people that use these wire guards because over time they feel like the clasp, or like on this other side where I've got the split ring hanging, it's going to strip away the coating of the wire or whatnot. I've not had any issues like that at all in my jewelry, and my jewelry looks quite finished without the wire guards, so it's just a personal preference. It's totally up to you guys. I'm just going to feed on these beads to cover up the tail, and I will come back to you in a moment. Now I have all of my little beads on here. This is a 10mm Amazonite glass for my bracelet, and you can see, I mean, I'm able to kind of squinch this up and everything, and there's no kinks happening. So that middle of the road, even though it's a 7-strand wire, it's that 0.15 diameter. That is just fine. It's just whatever you want to do. This is the 7-strand is more economical. Typically what I always use is the 7 strands at the 0.15. It fits in the small beads, it fits in the large beads, so I don't have any kind of problems, and it doesn't kink up on me. I'm going to open up my little container here and get out another wire guard. The wire guard size that I am using, because there are different sizes. This is a 4mm guard, and I got this package of the different colors. It's got the gold, the 2 different kinds of silver, like the bright silver and the nickel looking silver, kind of a stainless steel silver. Then it has like a gunmetal color, the antique brassy kind of color, and the copper color with a bright gold color. All of this was in one container, and I got it at Panda Hall. I get things from Panda Hall all the time. They are an overseas company. You do sometimes have to be careful with what you order overseas, so I'm just going to caution you there, but I have never had any problems with any of the stuff that I've gotten from Panda Hall. It's been high quality. I don't have to worry about any kind of tarnishing. It's lead and nickel free on all of the stuff that I get. So I'll leave a link for this container below. This is the smallest wire guard that they had. They do have the larger sizes, so again, depending on the diameter of whatever wire you're using, but this is the standard, this 4mm right here, and it lends itself to the size of beadwork that I'm doing. You notice that little tail? You don't see the tail anymore, so I hid that within my beads, and then that just gives it a little bit of extra strength right here on the very end of my piece. The first thing I need to do, just like I did before, was grab a crimp tube onto my wire, then get wire through one of the sides of the wire guard, loop it around and feed it through the other little cylinder. I'm going to feed that through my crimp tube, and then this is where I kind of get my fingernail and kind of scooch up. However, you see my beads are way down here, and this is where I'm at up here, so I'm just kind of getting my grip here. Then I need to go slide it all the way down to where I'm starting to get closer to my beadwork. That way I can kind of scooch up so that I can start to feed this little tail through the last couple of beads. I'm probably going to do like these last 3. I've got my wire poking through the last 3 beads. I've got this loop on top of the wire guard. I've got my crimp tube kind of getting closer to the tips of my wire guard. The only thing I have to kind of be wary of is if my wire over here is crossing inside my tube, which it actually is. So as I begin to pull on this wire here, that I can take out the excess between beads, I'm going to kind of keep my eyeball on my wire within the crimp tube and see how it straightened itself back out. So in order to keep it from crossing, looks like it needs to be on the right side. Just correct it as you need it. And now I know I need to keep this wire to the right side as I'm pulling my slack out. I'm just going to continue to nudge this down and pull the slack out until I get down to where I need to be here. I have pulled all of the slack out of my piece. I have just the slightest little gap because this wire is coming out through the bead, but I don't want to cut that off yet because I'm still dealing with this up here. My main goal is to be sure I don't have any huge gaps between my beads, that I can still bend this easily, that there's not too much tension in my overall piece. I want to hang on to this so that I'm sure I have my wire resting on top of the guard. I'm going to go ahead now, come in with my crimp plier, that second channel, and give it a nice good squeeze. Now when I did that, I was a little bit too close to my wire guard. Don't panic. We're going to use our bent nose pliers here to come over and fix that once we get the rest of this crimp done. I'm going to reposition my plier over here into that first channel so that I can close that up. Now I have my little wire guards on there, but what are we missing? When you use these wire guards, these are just to protect the wire being exposed and holding the clasps, the closures that you're going to be using, versus the way that I do it, where I am just directly on my wire. My split ring is directly on the wire. I don't have a wire guard. Same thing over here. My clasp is directly on the wire. I don't have a wire guard. I don't experience any kind of rubbing or friction issues because that is a smooth area on the inside of those loops. I'm not concerned that it's going to fray. However, if you enjoy using these wire guards, then all you have to do now is add whatever closure, if it's a lobster clasp or toggle clasp. You will have to employ a jump ring in order to get it attached to the loop, or if you wanted to, before you got wire cut off and everything, you could actually attach the clasp directly onto these without using jump rings. In other words, before I went to feed the wire back through the crimp tube and all the way through the beads, I could have popped on my lobster clasp directly onto the wire guard right here. I'm just going to use some jump rings to put it on there. Just I've got a little bit of extra movement in my piece. As far as the size, I made this on a 7-inch bracelet board, so by the time I get my clasps on here and everything, it's going to be about 7.5 inches, which is the standard size that I like to wear. I have the 2 jump rings here, and this one here to the left is the standard size. It is a 6 or a 7 millimeter, depending on where you've ordered it. I know the big box craft stores typically like to stock the 7 millimeter size, so that's what I have here. And then you have the option of using the smaller jump ring depending on how much space you need and what you're attaching, like your clasp. This is the 4 millimeter jump ring. So in my particular case, since I am using the wire guards, I'm going to opt to use the 4 millimeter, the smaller size jump ring, in order to attach my clasp and the other side of my bracelet. So in order to do that, I'd like to do all of my holding and stationary, just holding the piece with my left hand in that flat nose plier, and then I come in and do the action, the opening and closing, with my bent nose plier. So I'm going to push this away from myself like I'm opening a door so that I can open that jump ring. Grab hold of the clasp. You always want to double check your clasps that they work, especially these lobster clasps. So very easily I can open that without any problem. Nothing is more painful, especially the way that I typically do my jewelry, not using these wire guards, where I'm putting that clasp directly on the wire itself. And then if I had not tested that clasp, I cannot get that off of that wire at that point, so then I have to just cut the whole piece apart and start from scratch, versus if you put it onto a jump ring and then attach it to the wire, like if I was to do this, then you could take that off. However, I don't like to do the jump rings directly on the wire like that, because that gives you a weak point on the finished area of your design, because there is a slit in the jump ring that can over time cause it to come loose. So I'm just going to grab hold of this wire guard over here and then come over with the right side and pull it towards myself so that I can shut the door. And you can see I've got that lined up. I can come over the top and give it a squeeze just to be sure it's lined up and I don't have any gap there, so that my little clasp doesn't want to jump off there. Now at this point, you have a clasp and you have the other side as the wire. So you do not need to put a jump ring or split ring on the other side if you don't want to. And I think in my case, because I've used these wire guards and it's a nice sturdy wire guard, I am going to just leave it like this, because that gives me a nice sturdy point. It's a large enough loop that my clasp will easily grab a hold of it. Now, had I used a really large lobster clasp and it would not be able to easily grab hold of my wire guard on this side, then I would really need to consider putting the jump ring or a split ring on that side for my larger lobster clasp to grab hold of. I wanted to show you the alternative I was talking about if you decide that you want to put your clasp directly on it. So we're going to have the crimp tube on first. We're going to feed it through the first loop, come over and get it down through the second side. Before I put that tail back through that crimp tube, this is where you can grab your clasp, making sure you've tested it, that it works. Feed your clasp on the tail of that wire, feed it over the top of the little ending there. Now it's directly on your wire guard. Then you can stick that tail, like we did earlier, through your crimp tube, feeding that crimp tube up, kind of pinching those ends to where it meets the crimp tube, and now your little clasp is on the wire guard. It's directly on there. Either way you want to do it, this would be where you would go and crimp. So now I have this beautiful little bracelet that coordinates with my necklace, and I had made a pair of earrings previously. But in using the little wire guards, you can see how flexible that is while at the same time being secure. Use those if you're going to be making high-end jewelry where you are working with a lot of semi-precious or gemstones. It is an extra step. It makes it look very pretty. It's not necessary if you just want to do these standard closures with putting that directly on your wire. You can do that as well. Practice makes perfect on the crimping element of this. That is probably the biggest piece to having too much tension or too much slack in your jewelry designs, is getting your crimping down. That would be my number one tip, is to keep on practicing how you crimp. Hope that you have found this information useful. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to leave that in the comments and I may make a video on that. If you enjoyed this, please leave me a like on this video, comment, and subscribe to my channel. I would appreciate you sharing this video, and have a sparkle-rific day, y'all. Bye!